Hi friends, welcome back to the True Crime Corner with Mama Venus. I am here to deliver your weekly dose of South African true crime. If you are new here, then it's just welcome. I hope your day is going well so far. If not, please feel free to use any of my videos to take your mind off things for a little while. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so please go ahead and click the subscribe button if you haven't, just to support the channel and to easily access my videos. This week, we are going to be discussing the untold story of John Phuko Kgabi, a former police officer turned serial killer. He brutally claimed the lives of at least 16 young girls and left others with permanent scars. His murders started in the township of Atteridgeville and stretched all the way to the Limpopo province. I would like to apologize. I could not find any suitable pictures related to this case. Okay, let's begin with the story. The story of John Phuko Kgabi begins when he joined the South African Police Services and was assigned to work at the mortuary to assist the state doctors in performing autopsies. His position was that of an official dismemberer. He was to cut up and prepare bodies for autopsies. John is said to have been a good and diligent employee who took his job quite seriously. This would be until this one day, while prepping the body of a young girl who was of puberty age. He made an incision on her throat and immediately got an erection from it. This obviously shocked but also excited him because he was impotent. After the autopsy was done, he went to please himself, and this would be the beginning of a sexual fixation that would turn him into a serial killer. As he continued working in the mortuary, his fixation with cutting throats of young girls' dead bodies grew. It excited him so much that the doctors he worked with grew very concerned. By 1972, John would be dishonorably discharged from the police force. It is not clear if this was due to his fixation or not. Losing his job did not mean that his fixation was over. Now that he didn't have access to the dead bodies, he needed to make another plan. And just like that, little girls were no longer safe in the streets of Atteridgeville and in the homelands of Limpopo province. On the 16th of October 1974, a 5-year-old girl by the name of Helen Ramskin was waiting for her sister right outside her house on Sompane Street in Atteridgeville. A man approached her and led her away to an unknown area where he cut her throat. Her body would later be found 12 kilometers away from her home in Church Street West. This of course shook the community, and despite the police's best efforts to solve this case, it did not yield any positive results. 5 months later, on the 9th of March 1975, another little girl by the name of Mavis Masekwaneng in the former Louis Trichardt district was seen walking past the playground with a suspicious man following her. Not long after Mavis walked past, she was seen frantically running down the road with her hand clutching her throat. She looked like she was running away from something or someone. People on the road stopped her, trying to find out what was going on. They quickly noticed blood gushing from her throat. In an effort to help her, they removed her hands from her throat and saw that it was cut open. They quickly bundled Mavis into a blanket and they took her to the nearest police station, but she unfortunately passed on as soon as she arrived. This murder was in many ways similar to that of Helen Ramskin, but the police would have no way of connecting it because Mavis lived 400 kilometers away from Atteridgeville. A month later, on the 20th of April 1975, Omar Siobela, who was 8 years old at the time, was walking with a friend from Sithole Street to the local sports ground. A man approached them and specifically asked Omar to go buy him cigarettes. Given that this was a township setting and it was in the 70s, it was normal for older people to ask random children to go to the tuck shops for them. So Omar agreed and walked back to the nearest tuck shop whilst her friend entered the sports ground. Strangely, the man, instead of waiting for Omar near the sports ground, he followed her, and that is the last time Omar would be seen alive. Her body would be later found in a dam in Church Street West. A year later, on the 4th of April 1976, another 8-year-old would suffer the same fate as Omar. Josephine Mabena was lured by a man to a secluded area where he held her down and slashed her throat twice. The slashing is said to have been so severe, her vocal cords were completely exposed. Miraculously, Josephine survived this attack, and she was hospitalized at Kalafong Hospital in Atteridgeville. The police waited eagerly for her recovery to get more information about the attack, but Josephine would pass away 2 months later without being able to give the police any details of what happened. A year after Josephine's attack, 400 kilometers away in Bandelier village, young Rosina Maneja was taking a walk along the dusty streets of the village when a stranger stopped to ask her for directions. As soon as she stopped, the man quickly grabbed her and dragged her to a nearby felt. He sat on her and started slashing her throat with a piece of corrugated iron. After he was satisfied, he left her there to die. Amazingly, Rosina survived the attack and was fortunately found in time. She was then taken to hospital where she spent a month and fully recovered from the attack. At this point, 5 attacks with the similar MO had taken place, but they were years and miles apart and no one had connected them. Unbeknown to police, their inability to catch this killer gave him confidence, and his urge to kill will grow the following 2 years. A year later, on the 28th of March 1977, a man walking his dog near Kalafong Hospital made a gruesome discovery. This was the body of a 7-year-old little girl with her throat cut and a piece of flesh cut out of her leg. This was Gemma Shabangu. She had been missing for 10 days. Given the manner this little girl was murdered, the community began to link it to the other 3 cases of Herlin, Omar, and Josephine, who were murdered the same way. This caused chaos in Atteridgeville, and the community was up in arms. Since the latest murder included a piece of flesh missing, the community suspected that this was a witch doctor who used human organs for umuti, traditional African medicine. This led to the community raiding houses of local sangomas and other traditional healers, but no human organs were found during these raids. 2 months after Gemma's murder, in July 1977, another little girl will fall prey to John. The 9-year-old Lekgowa Zondi had left her home in Atteridgeville, where she was living with her aunt, to visit her mother in another area, but she would never reach her destination. This was not known though until days later when her mother visited the aunt's house end of July and was told that Lekgowa had left days before to visit her. Lekgowa's body was found with her throat cut open on the 6th of August 1977. It was discovered by a group of men who were herding sheep near Kalafong Hospital. Just like Gemma, a piece of flesh was missing from her leg. A day after Lekgowa's body was discovered, 10-year-old Eva Mavis Palamohlaga was walking from Ramapuputla Street to her uncle's house when a man grabbed her from behind and pulled her jacket off. She turned around to demand her jacket from this man, but instead, he dragged her to the nearby veld. According to Eva, the man sat on her and started slashing her throat with a piece of corrugated iron until she passed out. Fortunately, Eva had survived the attack. When she regained consciousness, she realized that the man had left and a piece of flesh was missing from her leg. She miraculously stumbled to the nearest house and was taken to hospital. She was later able to identify her attacker. News about Eva's survival of the attack started spreading in the community, and this shook John so much that he decided to move to the east of Pretoria in Mamelodi. This move, though, would not bring John's crime spree to an end. Instead, he continued killing in Mamelodi. On the 2nd of October 1977, 2 months after his arrival in Mamelodi, 7-year-old Gloria Khoza would go missing. She had been last seen playing with her friends in the street. Gloria's dead body was discovered the next day at the Bantule station near the market in Pretoria West. Her throat had been cut, her tongue, and several other organs had been cut out and were missing. Unlike the other cases though, this case had major police involvement. It was taken over by the Pretoria Murder and Robbery Unit, and a task team was formed. The police commissioner promised the shaken community that no stone will be left unturned in this investigation. Since it was suspected that the missing body parts might be used for traditional African medicine, the police involved Mpapane, a powerful Sangoma traditional healer from the former Eastern Transvaal, now known as Mpumalanga province. He was to assist in the investigation. However, no arrests were made and the murders suddenly stopped. At this point, John was scared. He was scared that he might get caught, so he decided to stop for a while. The murders would begin again 7 months later, on the 14th of May 1978. This day, Evelyn Motua, a 10-year-old girl from Fort Reka Heights near Tabatwane, had gone to buy a bus ticket to visit relatives in Atteridgeville. On her way, she was spotted by John, and he offered her a lift in his car. Seeing that she was hesitant to accept the ride, he lied, saying that he is an elder brother of a friend of hers, so she agreed. They drove for a few kilometers, and John pulled over and dragged Evelyn out of the car to a nearby veld. Evelyn lost consciousness during the dragging, only to wake up later covered in blood. She would fortunately be discovered by a man in a bicycle riding past the veld. She was taken to hospital and fully recovered from the attack. When interviewed by the police, she was able to describe the car and the man, but despite her ability to provide detailed descriptions, no arrests were made. Less than 2 months later, on the 25th of June 1978, 8-year-old Jennifer Ramalekane from Kudu Street in Atteridgeville went missing. Her body would be found 7 days later with her throat cut open, a piece of flesh had been cut from her thigh and forehead, and her tongue was missing. Also, her toes and nose had been removed. Even though the police had been working very hard to solve these murders, still no arrests were made. And unbeknown to anyone at this point, John lived just down the street from Jennifer's house. The next month, on the 27th of August 1978, the body of the 9-year-old Elaine Tsitsana Mokoena was discovered at a primary school located not too far from her home. Her throat was also cut and some of her body parts were missing. Fortunately, fingerprints were found at this crime scene, but no arrests would be made for a while after this. 2 weeks later, in September 1978, another body of a young girl was discovered in a veld near a suburb west of Pretoria. This was 9-year-old Loretta Edwards. Loretta lived in Swartbeck Street, in a suburb located near Mamelodi, east of Pretoria. Her throat had been cut and her tongue had been removed. Loretta had been reported missing almost a month earlier on the 15th of August 1978, and it is not clear how John had been able to lure her into his car. The mutilation of these young girls fueled the rumors that the murders were committed solely for the collection of body parts, and these body parts were used to concoct traditional African medicine. This of course created a very bad image for South African traditional healers, making them a target for the furious community. As a result of this, a prominent Sangoma from Soweto, Mrs. Mashele, called a meeting of all traditional healers in Johannesburg, asking them to pledge their support for this investigation. They wanted to distance themselves as far as possible from these murders and the use of body parts to concoct evil medicine. Even though both the police and the community were working very hard to solve these murders, John Kgabi would not be fazed. On the 11th of October 1978, 10-year-old Cynthia Matabe was sent by her mother to take the rubbish bin to the street outside her house, and this would be the last time her mother saw her. She never returned. On the 20th of November 1978, another little girl would encounter John and would never be seen alive again. Nomonde Florence Sebolai and her friend were on their way to church when they met a man who offered Florence an amount of 50 cents to help him offload beer from his car. Florence is said to have gotten into John's car, and her body would be found later that Sunday near Saltsville, and just like the other girls, body parts were missing. After Florence's murder, John Kgabi decided to move away from Atteridgeville all the way to Seshego, near to what is now known as Polokwane in Limpopo province. John did not move here to cool off though, because a few days after his move, on the 28th of November 1978, he spotted his next victim. This was the young Mata Motiba, whom he spotted while they were both at a tuck shop. John offered the little girl a lift home in his silver grey car, and Martha would never be seen alive again. When Martha did not arrive back at home, her father grew concerned, and he started searching for her. During the search, a young boy came forward telling Martha's father that he had seen her climbing into a silver grey car. So Martha's father and a few other men went searching for the car. They found the car with John Kgabi inside it. It must have been a parent's intuition because immediately Martha's father asked John where his daughter's body was. Even though he didn't know for sure, he knew she was not going to be found alive. John tried denying ever seeing the girl, but the men severely attacked him and took him to the police station, where he later agreed to take the police to the young mother's body. At this point though, he was still denying killing her. While walking across the field on their way to Martha's body, John asked the police if he could step aside to pee. Whilst peeing, a police officer saw John dropping something and was trying to grind it into the ground. The officer quickly rushed over to see what was going on. Turns out, it was a human windpipe. It was clear at this point that John had murdered Martha and he led them to her mutilated body. It was a sad scene for Martha's father, who took off his shirt and covered her dead body while kneeling down to pray for her spirit. John was then arrested and charged with Martha's murder. At the time, Seshego was still under the jurisdiction of the Pretoria Murder and Robbery Unit, and the unit was still investigating the murders of young girls in Johannesburg, and Martha's murder was eerily similar to the other murders. John would later confess to a number of these murders during an interrogation, and he went with the police to point out the crime scenes. Due to the brutality of these murders and John's demeanor, he was sent to Westcopi's psychiatric hospital for psychological observations. He is reported to have only stayed there for a week because the doctors feared that he might be harmed or killed by the other inmates. However, he had been found to be sane and perfectly competent to stand trial. John Phuko Kgabi's trial will begin in June 1979. And even though he had pointed out all the crime scenes, he was not charged with all the murders because of the lack of evidence. He was only charged with 6 murders, that of Gema Shabangu, Gloria Khoza, Jennifer Ramalekane, Loretta Edwards, Elaine Titana Mokwena, and Martha Motiba. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging for the 6 murders. He was also found guilty of the attempted murder of Evelyn Mutua, and he was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, of which he would never serve because he was hanged to death the next year on the 6th of February 1980 in Pretoria Central Prison. He was only 35 years old at this point and a father to a young girl about the same age as all his victims. When asked about the missing body parts, John denied ever selling them for traditional medicine. He said that they were just trophies that he used to sexually please himself after the murder. Even though his well-known murders are said to have begun in 1974, it is suspected that John had started killing soon after he was discharged from the police force. It is reported that Atteridgeville police had opened murder cases of 8-year-old Margarita Goliath and 10-year-old Patricia Goliath, who were murdered the same way as his other victims in 1973. He was also linked to the murder of Olga Mokwane, who was murdered in November 1976, but he is said to have denied any involvement to any of these cases, and there was no evidence to prove his involvement. Okay fam, this is where we ended with today's case. Even though this happened decades ago, I cannot begin to imagine the amount of pain the victims' families went through, having their children's lives cut short only for orgasms. Truly disgusting. Anyways, please let me know any of your thoughts and opinions on this case in the comment section below. We are still on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so please click the subscribe button if you haven't. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay safe and see you in the next video.